So if I had $1 for every time somebody said that I wasn't a real woodworker because I identify as a DIYer, I'd probably have enough money to buy a fancy woodworking shop filled with fancy woodworking tools. Here's the thing. DIY quite literally stands for do it yourself. And isn't that what we're all doing when we're building things? We're just like building things ourselves, right? There's a lot of talk out there about what makes somebody a real woodworker, whether it's the type of tools that you have or the techniques that you are or aren't using. It's honestly pretty exhausting and it kind of makes me sad. Hear me out. When I first started my woodworking journey, it was out of an 8x10 storage shed with hand-me-down tools from friends and family, and I quite literally started my own woodworking business with 3 power tools: a miter saw, a nail gun, and a sander. And fast forward over a decade later, and here we are making a full-time living off of being a woodworker and a carpenter and teaching people how to build things on YouTube. So, in today's video, we are going back to basics. I am going to show you how to build a beautiful and easy piece of furniture using 3 power tools and a couple of tricks I might have up my sleeve. And if I can do it, you can definitely do it. So let's get started. This video is sponsored by Kreg Tool. All right, first step is to use our super fancy table saw as a workbench. We ain't using table saws here, at least not in this project. Oh no, we are not, because like I promised in the intro, in this video we are only going to be using 3 power tools: a circular saw, a drill, and a sander. Really, on a single pencil sharpener. We've got our super official cut list and a good attitude. It's the recipe for success. So before we jump on in, a couple things I want to note. 1, if you're looking for the plans for this project, you can check them out in the link below the video description. I have everything listed there for you in printable plans. 2, we are going to be using some optional accessories here that make my life a lot easier, especially with 3 tool builds. But again, keyword, they are optional, but they are super helpful, and I'll talk about them throughout the video. So first up was measuring all of the pieces that I needed to cut from my plywood. I used a circular saw and this Kreg rip cut accessory for this. This is actually a really great accessory if you are trying to cut a bunch of plywood with just a circular saw, because it helps make repeatable cuts. Again, totally optional. If you don't have one of these, you can use just like a board and clamps. I will link a video below this video to show you another project where I did that, so you don't feel any sort of peer pressure to buy this thing, although I totally want to peer pressure you to buy this thing because it is rad. That being said, like I mentioned earlier in the video, I started my woodworking company with 3 tools, and I wish that I had started with a circular saw instead of a miter saw. So if you are looking into getting some tools to start out, I definitely recommend a circular saw and some accessories for it. But anyway, moving on to my favorite magic trick. A really good way to make plywood look like real wood is to use iron-on edge banding. So I applied that to all of the visible edges for the cabinet. This is just like a fun little neat trick that a lot of woodworkers use to make plywood look like solid wood. It's super easy to install, and all you really gotta do is just hand sand the edges down to blend into the wood. And once that was done, it was time for some joinery. Let's talk about it. So there are lots of different ways that you can join 2 boards together, and in this video we're going to be trying something new together. This is called the Kreg Mortise Mate, and what it does is you can drill some mortises, which are basically holes, into your board in order to put a tenon, which is like a piece that fits in the mortise, and join boards that way. And it's a strong joint that hides the joinery within the boards themselves. And the cool part about this is this particular tool only needs a drill to make the holes. Now we got to get the other side, gotta get the face frame. I don't know if you can see it with like their little markings. It's 1/2 inch and 3/4. We're going like basically in between for this one. So you may have heard of a really expensive alternative tool that basically does similar to this, that rhymes with the word schmamino, but this one is actually a way cheaper version and works really well. Yeah, it didn't go through to the other side, so that's a good sign. I don't know if this is allowed, but it should work. So I actually screwed it to the side of my workbench, and now I can like slide this piece in and out this way, clamp this down, and then drill the mortises downward. We're gonna try it. Let's do it. So like all of the accessories I'm using in this project, this is an optional one that honestly has made a really big difference in my workshop, but other options include pocket holes, or you can just screw things together through the face frame and hide them later. It's really up to you. I will say though, this accessory was pretty awesome and I'm actually impressed. That worked. That worked! And it looks dang good too! Yeah! That actually lined up really nicely. I got a bunch more, and then 6 more on the other one, and then we can dry fit this together. Okay, sweet. So I guess if you can secure mortise mate to the side of a workbench, it'll work for the face side of plywood as well. Oh, heck yeah, I'm so excited. Okay, let's finish up the other sides and get this thing glued up. So one of the things you definitely have to do when you have a limited amount of tools, just like we're using 3 power tools in this project, you have to find creative ways to elevate your woodworking game in creative ways. Like, who knew my first mortise and tenon cabinet would be made with a drill? Ow, got my finger in there. Like I mentioned though, this is just one option. There are so many other ways to join cabinet boxes together. I have made so many variations of this cabinet on my channel. I will link them below this video so you can check them out. She looks good. I am going to, do I want to sand now? Kind of, but also I don't really think we need to. So I'm actually gonna glue this thing up. We'll let it sit overnight. Do I want to try to fit the back in? I cut the back, let's see. I would probably just assemble this with glue because it's not like it's doing much structurally at this point. Like a glove. All right, I think what I'm gonna do is glue this up with the back in. So we'll get some clamps on, and that way the back can dry overnight as well. Now, if you don't have larger clamps in your workspace, I would probably suggest obviously buying some or using a different form of joinery for this project, such as like pocket hole screws or wood screws. And speaking of pocket hole screws, I actually decided to use pocket hole joinery for the back panel since you won't see it anyway once it's against a wall, but we'll talk more about pocket holes later. Day 1 done. But now that our cabinet box is all glued up, it is time to start focusing on making it look like an actual cabinet and not just a box, starting with the doors. Okay, looking good. Wow, it's actually glued up really nicely. Let's take these clamps off and see if it'll fall apart. It shouldn't fall apart, it should be fine. Yeah, a little bit of sanding, a little bit of chiseling. I forgot how much I like a good 3-tool weekend-esque project. Although, I don't know, I thought this was gonna take a weekend and it's been cold out, so I've been leaving things clamped for a little longer than usual. So this may be a 3-day build, but that's okay. If it's a 3-day weekend, it's still a weekend, right? Ooh. Woo! What do you think? We got a box. That's all cabinet making is, just a bunch of boxes, not that scary. Let's build some doors and a base and get everything assembled. So keeping with the 3-tool theme here, I cut all of the pieces for my doors using my circular saw and a straight edge. Again, if you don't have a track or a straight edge, you can use a scrap piece of wood or a carpenter square, whatever gets the job done. Let's cut these pieces. Now for this cabinet, we're doing something a little different. I'm not using plywood for the front of the cabinets. We're going to do a slat wood look. So I'll talk more about how to add plywood later if that's something that you want. But for now, we're just gonna focus on slat wood doors. So I've been talking a lot about optional accessories while building. Well, when you're limited to using 3 tools like a circular saw, a drill, and a sander, I would probably highly recommend looking into investing into one of those accessories to help with actually assembling the doors. For the cabinet carcass itself, you can kind of get away with some screwing and gluing, but when you're making door frames for cabinet doors, it's a little bit trickier and you want everything to line up the right way. So if you are going to be using 3 tools, I would probably say getting a good pocket hole jig or something like the mortise mate will really help to make that process so much easier. And since we're really only making door frames and then attaching slats to the front here, this is kind of a really simple way to do this by hiding all of the joinery on the inside of the rails and the stiles and then gluing things to the front later. If you wanted to add a panel at this point and you still are only using 3 tools, you might want to just cut some plywood and attach it using pocket hole screws to the inside of the doors. Or another alternative would be to cut a piece of 1/4-inch plywood that's slightly larger than that interior opening on the doors and attach it to the back of the rails and the stiles using wood glue and clamps. Either way works. Any of these work. You just got to get creative when you're using 3 tools. That's all. It's like the most stressful jigsaw puzzle ever. There's definitely a better way to do this. Anyway, now that the doors are glued up, it's time to move on to the base of the cabinet, and we will definitely be using pocket holes for this. Do you know how badly I want to use my fancy machine? But I promise you guys this was a 3-tool project, so we're not using the fancy machine for this. We're using the handheld one. So again, just like the cabinet box, if you don't have a pocket hole jig, you could probably use just screws and wood glue for this and hide the screw heads with dowels or wood filler or whatever. I personally like hiding as much of my hardware as possible, so using pocket holes was a great way to do that, and I was able to also drill holes in through the top of the base so I can drill it into the cabinet later. How to use this for the win. So after assembling the base, I decided to call it a day and let those doors dry, and then the next day it was time to remove them from the clamps. Also, I forgot to mention, I love a good weekend project, so if you are looking to do this in a weekend, then pocket holes are probably your best bet. If not, and you have some patience, man, gluing up these mortise and tenon joints is really awesome, and it was kind of cool to pull out some solid doors and not see any of the joinery. Anyway, at this point, it was time to pull out power tool number 3 of 3 for this project, sand everything down nice and smooth, and then I decided to use a concealed hinge jig and my drill to drill for the hinges that I'll be using for this cabinet. This is also one of those optional accessories that, in my book, if you're making cabinets, is no longer optional, at least for me. I've used it for every single cabinet build I've ever done. I've probably used this thing over like 50 times, and it is amazing. But after drilling the holes for the cabinet hinges, it was then time to focus on making these doors look like doors. Like I mentioned, I'm going to be doing a slat wood door look instead of a solid wood door look. So I'm going to be trying something a little differently. And to be quite honest, this is when I was wishing that maybe I just hand sanded everything and used a nail gun for tool number 3, because it was a little tricky getting these slats on without nails, but I figured it out and it worked out just fine. So let's talk about it. For this, I used 3/4 inch square dowels, and these that I got are, I want to say, 18 inches long. You can buy them in different lengths at your local hardware or home improvement store. But what I did is I took these dowels and I used some CA glue and an accelerator to essentially just glue and bond the dowels directly to the door. I then used some spare pieces to create spacers and continued the process all the way throughout the entire door. And I didn't worry about them being perfectly cut yet. We're going to trim them in a little bit using the circular saw. Side note, I really actually wanted to use wood gluing clamps for this, but using the CA glue and the accelerator really made a quick process of this entire door frame. I definitely, in hindsight though, would go back and use a nail gun if I didn't make this a 3-tool project, because it would just go a lot faster, and we're going to be using some of these slats as the actual pull on the door. You can add a handle to avoid this later, but I did have one situation where I had one slat piece fall off when I was carrying the doors into the house. I did fix it with the CA glue though, and it's been fine since, but I may put some nails in there in the future. Listen, we keep it real here. A nail gun would have been great for this project, I'm not gonna lie. Anyway, once these were all installed, I used my circular saw and that straight edge. Again, use whatever trick works for you and your shop to just trim all of these slats down to their final size and make sure that everything was nice and flush and straight. Like I said, some of these accessories that are definitely optional but super helpful make jobs like this with 3 tools just an absolute breeze and actually kind of fun, to be quite honest. Now at this point, my job was mostly done. There were a couple things I just wanted to tackle before hopping into stain. First up, I just did a quick little hand sand to get rid of any splinters or imperfections. And then I wanted to actually install a shelf inside of the cabinet as well. This can be done using screws and glue, using pocket holes and glue. I decided to use a shelf pin jig because I want to be able to adjust the shelf later. You probably don't need a shelf pin jig if you're being picky and choosy about the accessories that you're using for this build. You could probably just drill 1/4 inch round holes into it and do it straight, but I decided to use my jig because it made life easier and I had it on hand. Anyway, once that was done though, it was time to stain, which was kind of a pain because staining anything with slat wood is kind of a pain, but all of the hard work really worked out really well because it looks great. So after a coat of stain and a coat of finish, I let everything dry overnight, and then the next day I actually moved all of the pieces into my house to do final assembly because it was just a lot lighter to do that by myself. And I attached the base to the bottom of the cabinet using those pocket hole screws, and then it was time to install the cabinet doors and also to install the shelf as well. So I know that I've been doing a lot of big projects on this channel lately, but I really wanted to take a beat to go back to my roots essentially and do something simpler with 3 tools and show everybody that this stuff is so attainable. It really is so amazing to think back on how I started my woodworking journey with 3 tools in the corner of my dad's storage shed, and now look at us. Guys, look at us. You can build cool things with a limited amount of tools no matter what YouTube tells you. I swear, I promise. It looks so cool! Crushed it. With all this being said, I hope you loved this little 3 tool and a little longer than a weekend project. If so, let me know in the comments below if you would like me to do more of these. I actually had a really fun time making this cabinet, I'm not gonna lie. But in the meantime, I just wanted to say thanks so much for being here. Please make sure to subscribe to the channel. I think it's like New Year's right now, so Happy New Year. I hope everyone had an awesome holiday season. I'm so looking forward to everything that we have planned together in 2025. Let's do it, friends. But until then, I'll see you soon with another project, and happy DIYing.